As usual, I was recently working on my game, but I was really struggling to design some enemies to put in the first level. I was considering giving up and moving on to something else until I realized a simple change to my approach that made everything easier. Consider this level. I already arranged some of the tiles, and I was able to get the player to move around and attack. The logical next step was to add some enemies, but what kind of enemies do you add to a maple forest? Well, I already knew that I wanted some kind of weak enemy that slowly moves back and forth and doesn't pose much threat to the player. So I programmed it and drew it as this kind of gooey humanoid creature to justify why it moves so slowly. Oh, and the reason I'm drawing the enemies is to provide some kind of interesting depiction other than blank squares, because like the player, I didn't create any sprites for them in case I want to change their design in the future. Okay, so that's all well and good, but that's just one enemy that I already planned on making. What else is there to add that would make sense in the maple forest? Maybe some wildlife, like bats, spiders, bears? No, that doesn't seem right. All of those things just charge at you and wouldn't lead to interesting combat. I considered more unusual enemies like skeletons, bandits, and weird tree monsters, but I really struggled to think of a moveset that works in practice. For some reason, I decided to rethink the spider. I realized that if the spider charges at the player fast enough, the challenge would be in timing the attacks properly to kill it. It could also work as a companion to other enemies, making the combat scenario more complex. I made the spider using some of the code from the previous enemy, though the spider follows the player and is actually faster than the player. It became impossible to dodge, so I had it only change direction once it's far enough from the player, allowing you to dodge by jumping over it. Finishing off with a few minor changes, I was left with an enemy that I actually really liked. The problem is, look at how much effort it took to come up with one enemy. I had to brainstorm many types of creatures that would fit in the setting. Then I had to determine what kinds of abilities each creature had and if it would practically work in the game. I felt kind of exhausted and wasn't getting much in return. Have you figured out what I'm doing wrong yet? Well, this is about when I figured out, and the solution is actually found in the first enemy. It was created to fulfill a very specific purpose, that being to give the player an opportunity to test out the attacks with minimal danger. All of the context comes later. Most of my time was spent doing it backwards, trying to think of the creature first and the gameplay second. That might seem obvious to some people, and I even did it properly for one enemy, but because I hadn't reconsidered how I was solving the problem, I almost gave up. Ultimately, I learned that if you're having difficulty solving a problem, before you give up, it may be a good idea to consider whether it's not your own skill holding you back, but the perspective from which you're solving the problem. That being said, after recognizing the problem, I was able to start creating more enemies quicker, such as this spike roll. I wanted to test the player's jumping ability, so I thought a rolling indestructible set of spikes was a good option. Once again, this enemy reuses code from the first enemy, except it's faster and can roll off of edges. The whole process of making this enemy was very quick, and although it is a simple enemy, the approach of starting from gameplay first had proven to be preferable. The final enemy I worked on was this knight. Its purpose is to test the player's ability to pick a correct defense to attacks. It actually behaves quite differently from the other enemies, so most of the code I had to write from scratch. The basic behavior is that the knight slowly takes steps towards the player, and when it's close enough, it either attacks to the front or from the top down. This means that the best defensive move for the player is to either jump or move back, depending on the attack. I would say the knight is the most unfinished enemy of the four I've shown, but that's only because its mechanics are so complicated. Over time, I'll flesh out its behavior, and I think it'll become a very fun enemy to engage with. That's all I have to show for today. I hope you enjoyed watching, and would consider subscribing to keep up with similar videos in the future. Thank you. Bye.